It's 3 o'clock, at least it is in the Netherlands. Good afternoon. My name is Willem van Oort and I welcome you to this Gaming in Holland webinar in which we will take a closer look at the recently approved decree banning all untargeted advertising for online gambling. This new decree bans all broadcast, print and outdoor advertising for online gambling and imposes significant restrictions on advertising through online channels. In today's webinar, we will discuss these new regulations and how these will impact the Dutch regulated online gambling market. Of course, there's only so much we can do in one brief webinar. If you would like more information, please consider attending our upcoming Gaming in Holland conference on June 8 in Amsterdam. Our confirmed speakers include René Jansen, Chair of the Netherlands Gambling Authority, Fedor Meerts, Head of Integrity and Gambling of the Ministry of Justice and Security, and also Pontus Lindwall, CEO of Betson, and many, many more. In short, we've gathered a lot of expertise and I think much relevant information will be shared. Naturally, the Gaming in Holland conference also offers excellent networking opportunities and a chance to meet all key decision makers. Before we kick off today's webinar, I would like to thank our strategic partners and sponsors, which you can see listed on the screen. Thank you all very much for your support. We would not be able to do this without this support. Thank you. As always, our webinars are interactive. If you would like to participate in our poll or submit a question to one of our speakers, you can do so through the Slido app. To use Slido, please scan the QR code on your screen with your mobile or visit slido.com, then enter the event code #GIH, and then select either the live polls or the Q&A tab on the top of your screen. Questions will be addressed and if possible answered during the webinar at the end. With us today we have two expert speakers, which I would like to welcome. Dr. Alan Littler, gaming lawyer at Kalff Katz Franssen, and also Peter Paul de Goeij, who is Managing Director of Netherlands Online Gambling Association, NOGA. Welcome Alan and welcome Peter Paul. We are very glad to have you. To properly kick off this webinar, we first would like to get a sense of what your expectations are regarding the recently adopted advertising restrictions. So let's go to slido.com, use the QR code that you see on the screen, or go to slido.com and use the event code and let us know your thoughts regarding the following poll question we have here. Do you expect that the new advertising restrictions will lead to a mostly static online market without major changes in market shares? Give this a minute or so to get all the results in. Again, if you point your camera to the QR code on the left of your screen, you very quickly get into Slido. Seeing some results getting in now. Again, you can also do this on your desktop. Just enter the URL slido.com, the event code #GIH, and then on the top of the screen there's a tab that says polls or Q&A, and if you use the polls you can cast your vote here. So we're getting them in here. I think we have 30 results coming through, 31 votes, so give it one more moment. It's a yes and no race here. So do you expect that the new advertising restrictions will lead to a mostly static online market without major changes in market shares? Yes or no? It's almost around the 50-50 mark. So I think with almost 40 votes, we're going to leave it at it's mostly a no, but it's a close finish with a yes. So it's 55-45 as a main tendency here. So with this in mind, we would like to lead into the webinar and see what our speakers have to say. Our first speaker today is Dr. Alan Littler, gaming lawyer at Kalff Katz Franssen. Alan, thank you very much for being here. How are you?
All well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Alan. Alan, Starting with the first question, can you please explain what, in your view, are the main provisions of the newly announced ban on untargeted advertising for online gambling services?
Sure, yes. Well, indeed, the ban is in a decree, and the decree was published in its final form last month, but it is something which has been floating around in draft form since last summer. I think I'll just sort of shortly highlight the main points, and then we can discuss it further also with Peter Paul, the other speaker, later on.
Yeah.
So
If you
basically,
could speak a
the
bit
ban
louder,
will end.
Alan, that'd be great.
A little bit
If you
louder?
can speak a
Okay,
bit loud, thank you.
yes. So the ban will enter into force on the 1st of July. So we have about 6 weeks to figure out what needs to be done and which actions can be taken. As stated, the ban is a ban on untargeted advertising for online gambling. So it does not cover other forms of high risk, as the legislation sees it, high risk gambling. So it does not include casinos, and it does not include the online, or the offline, I should say, slot machine arcade sector. One of the key elements of the ban is that it will prohibit advertising on all media by all forms other than online gambling, other than online channels. So there will be no advertising on TV anymore. There'll be no advertising in public spaces. So no advertising at tram stops, bus stops, stations, and that sort of thing. And there will be no advertising in printed media either. So it will only take place online. And in a later point, we'll also get to what online entails. But when it is taking place online, it will be subject to 3 conditions. And it's important to realize, and this is something we see in the questions which we're getting in at Kalff Katz Franssen, that people don't always realize that these conditions are cumulative. So it's not one or the other. We have to, when advertising, the advertising regime, the advertising activities will have to satisfy, I should say, not only address, but satisfy all 3 conditions. So first of all, the recipient of the advertisement, or the potential recipient, I should say, should also have the opportunity to opt out of receiving any advertising material. So that's one important point. That's perhaps one of the simpler points in comparison to the following 2. And the next one is that the operator, via their affiliate, via a third party, has to ensure that the best available measures are taken to prevent advertising reaching those who have opted out of receiving such advertising, and prevent that it reaches anybody who belongs to one of the vulnerable groups covered in the legislation. But they should also ensure that it does not reach young adults. And young adults are those in the age range of 18 to 24, so up to 24, not including 24. And they also have to ensure that those who have excluded themselves from gambling at the level of the operator are also excluded from receiving any advertising material. And much has been said about a 95% threshold. So this relates to the third point, the third key point. And the third key point is that best available techniques, whatever they may prove to be, might be Google Analytics, might be something else, the best available techniques have to be taken to demonstrate that at least that of those who receive the gambling advertising materials, at least 95% are over the age of 24. At least 95% are not young adults. And this is in contrast to the draft decree from last year, which basically required the operators to ensure, whether themselves or via their third parties, that no advertising reached young adults. So now we have a 5% sort of safety valve margin for error, if you like. But that's still a pretty high threshold to reach. And the threshold, the 95%, only applies to young adults. It doesn't apply to the other categories of persons, the other categories of individuals who should be excluded from advertising. So we'll discuss the complications of that in a moment. Another key point is that pertaining to sponsorship. So, of course, once the market had opened in 2021, there were various sponsorship contracts which were activated. For those which are existing before the 1st of July 2023, there will be a 1-year transitional period for non-sporting sponsorship. So if it's sponsoring an event or a competition, or not necessarily a competition, an event or a happening which is not a sports event, then that can run until July 2024 and until July 2025 in terms of sporting events. So yes, the big bang, if you like, will take place in 6 weeks, but then there will be a transitional regime for existing sponsorship contracts, and after that, they will have to be phased out. So hopefully that gives an indication of the key points.
Yeah, that's a quite extensive set of rules that you summarized there, Alan. Thank you for doing that. Which brings us to the second question. Do you think we can expect additional guidance or rules from either the Netherlands Gambling Authority or from the Ministry of Justice and Security?
In terms of the ministry, I very much doubt it. They will have given the guidance, to the extent that one can call it guidance, in the explanatory text to the decree. I would not expect them to come up with anything else. And we also have not seen that with the existing decrees and regulations and so forth, which have been in place in the past 2 years with the opening of the market. Hopefully, and I understand that this is in the pipeline, but it's not here as yet, there will be some guidance from the Gambling Authority, from the NGA. Again, we don't know what that would include. We don't know whether the authority will take a different position to the rest of the market on key points. We have seen that already, I should say, in relation to the matter of advertising and young adults. There have been several fines on this matter in the past 6-8 months. The Gambling Authority has taken a different interpretation, compared to a large segment of the online market. So we could, on that basis, the past doesn't predict the future, but it may very well be the case that the authority takes a different view than the majority of the market does once, in those guidelines. And hopefully those guidelines may also include some information on how the NGA will seek to enforce this prohibition. Because, as we've seen, if best available techniques have to be utilized, well, what are they? There's going to be some discussion on that. How will the Gambling Authority obtain information to check and, supervise and enforce the market and uphold these new, this new prohibition and the sub-elements to it. So yes, I expect that there's guidance on the way, and we look forward to reading it.
Exactly.
And hopefully, I just wanted to add, we have 6 weeks until the market not the market opens, but till the new regime enters into force, I should say. So, the sooner that such guidance comes out, the better, because of course, affiliates, operators, and others in the supply chain don't want to have to change what they have in mind at the very last minute. So, it will be interesting to read.
Guidance is welcomed. A lot of information there, Alan. Thank you. If you at home or in the office have any questions, not about the guidance, of course, but if you have questions to Alan at this point, please go to Slido, use the Q&A tab, ask your question. You can also upvote other people's questions if you see good questions, and we will try to address some of those at the end of the webinar. Moving on to the next question. Alan, thanks to the new decree, most forms of advertising will no longer be allowed, but what forms of advertising for online gambling will remain permitted under the new rules?
Well, of course, online, but what does online entail? So, the most obvious examples will be affiliate websites and websites in general. That's a clear example of a form of online information. But of course, there are other ways in which content can be provided online. And I believe the explanatory text of the decree also refers to measures or channels rather, such as video platforms, digital radio, TV on demand. So how that would take shape in relation to the three cumulative conditions is a good question. Is a question which needs to be answered. But it's not just affiliate websites. If the cumulative conditions can be met. And of course, those cumulative conditions also apply to affiliate websites as well. Of course, there's also social media. I'm not sure how the conditions can be applied successfully to social media, but in principle, it's not prohibited. But in practice, it may very well prove to be. And
Thank you.
another element, of course, is the actual online gambling environment of the operator themselves. That's also mentioned within the explanatory text. So that is also an area which would have to be compliant. So one could imagine, after this decree enters into force, that young adults, when they access and enter the player environment on the operator's website or app, are not receiving advertising as they may do at present. So it would be a little bit like going into a bar as a 19-year-old, but not seeing any happy hour offers or 2-for-1 offers. You'd be allowed in, but there will be no advertising. Great. So those are sort of the areas in which such materials, can be provided, subject to the conditions mentioned in the beginning in the first question, in response to the first question being satisfied.
Thank you, Anna. That was very, very clarifying. For our next questions, we will also turn to Pieter Paul de Goeij, who is the Managing Director of the Netherlands Online Gambling Association, NOGA. Welcome, Pieter Paul, and thank you for coming here today.
Thank you for having me, Willem. A pleasure always.
Likewise. So our next question is directed to both of you. So to what extent do these new rules amount to a de facto ban on online gambling advertising? We would love to hear what you think about it.
Let me just say, I don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know yet whether this will turn out to be a de facto ban, and that is because the way this will be implemented and will be policed and enforced is unclear at this moment. And we are concerned and we are anxious and we try to do everything we can not to end up at a de facto ban, because that would be really, really detrimental to consumer protection and to channeling players towards the regulated offer.
Yeah, and just to echo what Pieter Paul was saying, a lot will depend upon what is perceived to be a best practice in excluding the individuals who need to be excluded. In terms of age verification, I could imagine, for example, that IDIN would be an excellent way of doing it, but I could also imagine that nobody would want to use IDIN, verify their age via a banking app, to see advertising materials on a website. So, what's the balance? Is it an absolute? Is it a best practice in an absolute sense, or is it a best practice in some sort of balanced way? And can we take cost and the administrative burden into consideration, or not? Yeah. So that's also something which I think needs to be figured out. And I think once that has been fathomed out, then we'll know whether or not it's a de facto ban or a near de facto ban or something which is manageable.
Yeah. So, and what I try to keep in mind when thinking about this, and hoping, or let's say not to worry too much about this, is that the minister did recognize that advertising, albeit limited, plays an important role in channeling players towards a regulated offer, and it was never the intention to have a blanket ban or a full ban of advertising. But we must ensure that with the implementation, we don't arrive at a blanket ban, because again, this market that has just been regulated is going in the right direction, and it would be really, really pitiful if we end up losing players to organized crime again.
Yeah. Thank you. So I hear your concerns there. Moving to the next question about the following. We've already heard that advertising through online channels will remain allowed under new rules, under restrictions that you mentioned, Alan. Can the two of you tell us a bit about more how the new rules will affect affiliate marketing specifically? Alan, Pieter Paul?
Happy to say a few words first. Perhaps not looking necessarily at the precise measures which can be taken. I should imagine that the market itself for affiliate advertising will become dominated by one or two larger players. It's clear that costs and will have to be incurred in order to comply with these measures. Of course, to a degree, they can be passed on to the operators and the consumers, but of course, there needs to be development work up front, and efforts need to be made. So I can imagine that the number of affiliates serving the Dutch market in a compliant way and a way in which operators are happy with will shrink, and depending on the number of affiliates who are left, I don't know, after 6 months, after 12 months, the possibility, the bandwidth, if you like, for operators to market will also shrink. And I think that will be of most importance and the greatest detrimental effect to newcomers to the market. There are some applicants who are still in the process of their, with their application before the NGA, and now the rules of the game are changing. And there are a few, at least, of who we're aware, who are still waiting to submit their application. So, those who are on the market will have a stronger position than those who seek to enter 6 months, 12 months down the line. And I'm not necessarily talking about those who were subject to cooling off requirements either. So, that's certainly going to have an effect on marketing in general, and specifically via affiliate marketing.
Yeah, completely agree. And to add to this, I think affiliates are basically in the same position as operators, as they don't know what will apply and how rules will be applied after July 1st. Of course, they're trying to do whatever they can right now to ensure that they fit through the new the new rules. But what we should not forget is that outside the affiliates that want to abide by the law and that are, channeling players towards the regulated offer, there's also a number of affiliates out there that are doing business with doesn't matter who, as long as it generates cash, and they are advertising for unlicensed operators, and this happens online. So luckily, the ministry recognized that affiliates play an important role here in channeling players towards the regulated offer. So they did not want to make life of affiliates impossible, but it will be interesting to see what they come up with to make sure that they fit through.
Yeah, again, the guidelines will play an important role there. Thank you very much for clarifying this, Alan and Peter Paul. So for next question, Peter Paul, we will stay with you since you represent several major Netherlands licensed online operators. Could you tell us to what extent these new rules will add to the administrative burden of licensed operators? Alan already referred to administrative burden for affiliates, but here specifically to operators. Do you have any specific concerns?
Well, let me speak from hope. I hope that it will not add too much to the administrative burden of licensed operators, because the burden already is pretty high. But then again, if you want to be a licensed gambling operator, that comes, it comes with the territory. But for instance, if the KSA would say, well, we want you to be able to prove that in each and every occasion you have done your work up front and afterwards to see what the effects were of your targeted advertising, and you will have to keep track of this in a central database or in a database that you can give the information from at first request, then it will definitely add to the administrative burden. So it is something that we're looking at with some anxiety, and of course, again, it all boils down to the implementation and the policy as the KSA will set it out.
Yeah, so hope and anxiety. I hope it will be more of one and less of the other. You know what I mean? So staying with you, Peter Paul, going to the next question. How will these advertising rules impact the regulated online market? Your thoughts?
So let's not beat around the bush. We were always against a ban on advertising. I read yesterday that Latvia is thinking about, undoing the ban on online gambling advertising, because it is basically playing into the cards of the illegal operators, and we have that concern too, and we still have that concern. But reality is that the Parliament in majority said that there should be a ban on targeted advertising, so it's reality. We'll try and make it work under circumstances, but there definitely will be an impact, and hopefully it will not be negative. And what I mean with that is not negative in the sense of having a downward effect on channeling rates, because in Italy, for instance, it clearly showed that after the ban on online gambling advertising, illegal gambling participation was on the rise, and considerably on the rise.
Thank you, Peter Paul. Very insightful. In the meantime, everybody who's watching the webinar, please don't forget that you can submit your questions to the speakers that we will go into at the end of the webinar. Use Slido, click, on the right side. There's a QR code that you can use, or go to slido.com and enter the hashtag GIH as event code. For the next question, let's return to Alan here. Alan, as you know, the new decree contains a provision stipulating that operators that offer both online and land-based services may not advertise their land-based offerings in such a way that it can be confused with advertising for their online product. This brings us to the final question to you. How can operators with both land-based and online offerings adequately distinguish between the two in their marketing campaigns, online and offline?
Well, one simple answer would be wait for the guidance from the NGA, because in the explanatory text to the decree, the ministry explicitly points out that this is something which the Gambling Authority will revert on in future. So it'll be interesting to see what the authority has to say, but of course we want to discuss it now and not at some point closer to the 1st of July. So this is quite an interesting provision. So if you have a license for a form of gambling other than remote and a license for remote, then you cannot use the scope, the freedoms, let's say, as they exist, to the extent that they exist for advertising the land-based offer, to also or potentially also, as the language of the legislation also says, to advertise the remote offer. So the two have to be kept separate. Of course, operators use one brand name, perhaps have one logo, and so forth. So there's going to have to be some thought given to how to sort of separate the two in practice. Maybe this is a little bit of an artificial exercise. Who knows how the consumer will perceive things at the end of the day. But if I were to have a land-based license, I wouldn't be able to engage in any advertising which bears a strong resemblance in its form or in its content, for example, to my remote offer and any remote advertising. I wouldn't be able to give the public, or those at least who have opted in to see my remote advertising, that wouldn't apply here, but I wouldn't be able to give the impression of promoting my remote offer, and I wouldn't be able to directly or indirectly promote my remote offer in the land-based offer. So I wouldn't be able to have, for example, the URL of my remote offer in the ad for the land-based offer. For example, see xyz.nl for the locations of my halls, for example. So they're going to have to be kept separate. I think it'll be interesting to read the Gambling Authority's guidance on this. One could imagine, for example, that it would be about using perhaps different colors or different typefaces, not copying or not using exactly the same logo in both sets of advertisements, for example. Whether that comes to pass in that level of detail remains to be seen. But yeah, I think the proof of the pudding will be in the eating and seeing what the market serves to the wider public and how the Gambling Authority digests it, I guess, at the end of the day. And we'll take it from there. But yeah, it will be a hard one to separate the two entirely, of course. because Coca-Cola Light and Coca-Cola Normal are both Coca-Cola, of course. So to what extent can they be split? But yeah, it'll be something to keep an eye on, but it'll be a difficult one.
Well, let's see how that works out. Thank you very much, Alan. That was very helpful. So we have now into the webinar now, a perfect time to go into the audience Q&A. Reminder, if you would like to participate in the Q&A, please scan the QR code on the left side of your screen, or go to slido.com, event code #GIH, and you can participate. There's a little tab on the top where you will see the Q&As. You can either ask the question yourself, or you can upvote somebody else's question. And our team here is looking at these questions and make a selection within the given time of the webinar to look at that. So let's see if we have a first question for the audience here. Willem, that was not me, that was another Willem. About the 95%, do we have insights into how the Dutch government will monitor this? I think you mentioned something already, Alan. Maybe you can repeat that or clarify that a little bit. I think you made a statement.
Yeah, so I referenced the use of Google Analytics. That was one of the two methods which was being mentioned in the explanatory text, but that's more a way for the operator to ensure that the advertising is not being seen by more than 5%, let's say, of those under 24, to ensure, therefore, that the right threshold is being reached for those who are 24 and older. But indeed, it remains a mystery as to how the gambling authority will actually monitor this itself, or will it simply ask for, demand information from the operators themselves, and perhaps as an extension of that via the operators, affiliates, and third parties through the operator. But as to them actually collecting information themselves, yes, maybe they can also use Google Analytics or some other software program, but I think it'd be very difficult to see.
Yeah.
And hopefully the guidance from the KSA, the NGA in due course, will provide some insight into this, but I can imagine that they'd also like to keep this one up their sleeves. But good question.
Good question. Thank you for the clarification of the background, Alan. Anything to add, Peter Paul, to the 95% question?
No, I completely agree. And it will be interesting to see how we can get a grip on that, 5%, and how you measure and monitor that. So.
Great, thank you. Moving to the second question that was upvoted 9 times by Vincent. What content is considered gambling related? Is there a definite list? What are under 24 years old allowed to see? Offers, brand reviews, demo games, etc. Alan?
Of course. If it's advertising, they're not allowed to see it. That's the simple answer. But of course, the real question is, what is advertising and what constitutes advertising? For example, when is a review on an affiliate website editorial content rather than advertising in a purer sense? But no, I can also imagine that if a demo game is designed to promote a particular game, then that could also fall within the prohibition, because what's the point of advertising? To promote something. So it's a very broad catch-all notion, and I think it would be difficult to perhaps find things which are promotional in their nature, but do not promote to such an extent that they're advertising, if that makes sense. So very little. My answer would be.
Peter Paul?
Yeah, I think it basically is all centered around the brand. And I would think the games that are being offered by a licensed operator, that is what you should stay well away from, I think. But then again, it all boils down to how this will be implemented by the KSA. But I think staying away from brand or game-related material, which may be considered advertising, or marketing, because the text in the decree is actually broader than just advertising. And it's my understanding that the KSA will also take a broader view.
Yeah, quite clear. Great, let's move to the next question. Running a little bit out of time here. This question was upvoted 8 times by anonymous person. How can operators ensure that their online advertising won't reach vulnerable players?
I can answer this one. It's really easy.
Yeah.
We can't. We can't ensure. And this was in the previous version of the decree. Luckily, that has been taken out. But reality is we can't. You cannot prevent even a minor from seeing advertising. For instance, if he's on his dad's mobile phone and he sees an ad for online gambling. So this is reality. We cannot prevent this from happening. What we can do, however, is do our best to prevent that, online gambling advertising is seen by vulnerable groups, such as, the younger demographic.
Anything to add, Alan?
No, I mean, I'm glad Peter Paul stepped in and answered the question in the first place, in the first instance. No, I don't see how it's possible to ensure. I think it's only possible to reduce and to mitigate the extent, but not to ensure in an absolute sense. No.
Yeah, that's quite clear. So maybe 1 or 2 quick last questions. Let's see what we have. If there's any questions left. Question here from an anonymous person that was upvoted 4 times. Google, so PPC, that's the ads in Google, and Google Ads does not allow custom audience in gambling. So we aren't able to exclude people who have opted out. How does the regulator see this? Well, the regulator is not in this webinar. So I think it's hard to ask that question, but maybe any of you has thoughts about it. It's a very technical question, I realize that.
We have been looking specifically at the part that discusses the opt-out for advertising, and my understanding is if it's impossible to prevent someone who has excluded himself from seeing advertising ads, if it's not within your control, then it can also not be held against you. But this is only as far as targeted advertising online goes, obviously. But again, this remains to be seen, and how it will be implemented, and most likely it will be decided in practice, and basically learning by doing, hopefully together with the KSA.
Alan?
No, I agree. I mean, there are a couple of comments here. One is, when somebody goes to an affiliate website for the first time, then they would have to opt in or opt out. Why would you go to an affiliate website to opt out? But of course, there are websites which may include gambling advertising, but not solely gambling advertising. So there, the role of opting in, opting out is more valuable. I suppose, but in Google Ads, if it's not possible, it's not possible. And somewhere within the explanatory text, and this relates to the 95% threshold, and this then of course only relates to young adults, it says that if you cannot exclude, or if you cannot meet the requirement, then you shouldn't use the approach at all. So you could also have a discussion at some point about, if we're talking about ads or the rankings or paid advertisement, paid rankings in Google, maybe that shouldn't be used at all. That's also one way, not a particularly industry-friendly way of looking at it, but maybe the way that the regulator sees it.
Yeah.
To be continued.
One question from the audience results in 3 sub-questions from us. But But some of these questions clearly indicate what lives in the minds of the audience here today. I don't know if we have a quick last question. It's 39, it's 40 past the hour. Last question to Alan here, voted 6 times. Will operators still be allowed to advertise on their own website? Good question. For example, having advertising on their homepage visible to everyone.
Good question. Good question. In the explanatory text, there's reference to the spelomgeving, so the sort of player environment. Of course, there's a point before you log in where you land on the website or open the app, assuming that you're not permanently logged into your app, of course. So could you see advertising at that stage? I would say, without having given it a super amount of thought, that maybe no, you shouldn't, and you should allow the player to log in. The player would then have to, at some point then or in the past, have opted into receiving advertising material from you, including that on the web page, on the homepage. And of course, if it's a young adult, then I would say they would have to end up in an environment which is void of any gambling advertising, because they're a vulnerable group. But of course, how could you would then get to a discussion, I believe, of, is listing, providing an overview of games which can be played advertising, or is it just providing a list of games which can be played? So we're going to get in interesting waters, because here we're going to have a group of players, of individuals who are legitimate players, but who cannot receive, who have to be fenced off, ring-fenced, blindfolded, so they don't see any advertising material. So that's going to be a very tricky tightrope to walk, I believe.
I realize this question was asked to Alan, but still I feel compelled to say a few words about this. Although I agree with Alan, basically we don't know yet, but I would hope that advertising on your own website continues to be allowed as it is today, because if not, this whole decree would defeat the purpose for which it was introduced, which is consumer protection and not hurting channelization. And if you would not be allowed to advertise on your own website, and illegal operators can still do this on their own website, on Google Ads, etc. I mean, why would you want to put legal operators on such a, how do you say that, negative position in comparison to illegal operators? So I would be completely surprised if this turns out to be the case.
Yeah. No, I think it was a good question, and it stirred
Absolutely.
up some thoughts here from you, Alan, Peter, Paul. I think we're running out of time, and we have to wrap this up. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Peter, Paul, for sharing your thoughts and answering the viewers' questions. I'm certain that your insights were very, very much appreciated, and to be continued in a different place and time in the near future, I am sure. So thank you very much for participating.
See you in Amsterdam.
Thank you. Yes.
Absolutely. Of course, as I mentioned before, there will be more to discuss at the upcoming Gaming in Holland conference as well. So if you'd like to hear directly from the chair of the NGA, as well as other major stakeholders, this event should not be missed, we think. As mentioned before, we'll have an update from the Ministry of Justice and Security. We have Betson CEO Pontus Lindwall making an appearance. We also have Floor van Bakken, Prevention Manager at Jelinek, share thoughts on safer gambling, which would be quite interesting. In addition, we will discuss the Dutch market in its European context, operations, product development, possible privatizations, and much more. Last and definitely not least, I'm pleased to announce that we last week convinced Remy Gieling, who's a well-known tech watcher and RTL presenter, will explain the possibilities of AI, including tools as ChatGPT, can bring to gambling. The Gaming in Holland conference is also the place to meet the key decision makers in the Dutch gambling market if you had not been there before. The registration is open at gaminginholland.com, and we hope to see you all there. After this little advertising for Gaming in Holland here, we've come to the end of this Gaming in Holland webinar. I hope you found it useful. A link to a full recording of today's webinar will be shared in the post-webinar email that we will be sending out as soon as possible. As always, please keep in touch. If you haven't signed up for the newsletters and print magazines, please go to our website gamingin.eu, where you can sign up to all the various communication methods. Let's stay in touch, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.